Time for shit to get depressing.
Hello, insects of YouTube, it is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce, and welcome to the next installment of Congratulations, in Neon Genesis Evangelion Retrospective, and today we're here to talk about episode 12, known as The Value of a Miracle, or the American title, if I can pull it up right here, or the American title, She Said, Don't Make Others Suffer for Your Personal Hatred, or as I like to call this episode, Major Katsuragi and How She Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Angel. And this is, of course, when things start to take a turn for the depressing for Evangelion. It really doesn't start until episode 15, in my opinion, but this is really where the fun begins. I mean, right from the get-go, we see the subtitle that says, 15 years earlier, yada yada yada, that kind of shit. And suddenly we see this man holding this little girl, all bloodied, everything's getting destroyed all around, all bloodied, walking over to this pod, this base safety pod, and he puts the little girl in there, and you see that he's all bloodied, huge chunks of skin are missing off of him, burnt, blood everywhere, and she's not that much better, as we see later on, but suddenly we discover that when she wakes up, it's a young Misato, and my mouth dropped. Because this was the episode where we learn Misato's backstory and how tragic it really is. And it is really this backstory that makes me love Misato the most out of all the characters in this. In terms, she's definitely the best. My favorite one will always go to Gendo just because of how mysterious he is, but she really is the best character because she is able to take this tragic backstory and use it to her advantage. Because she takes it with pride. She takes this backstory with pride, and she still manages to keep a high persona and everything like that. And of course, we see here that she says father before the... First off, some fantastic imagery. And I know I'm drawing a lot to just like the first 2 minutes of this episode, but holy shit, those are immensely powerful 2 minutes, because here's we learn why she has the Greek cross, and that's because her father gave it to her when he was dying, which makes that Greek cross even more symbolic to many ways, and as I said before in a video, that it represents strength, and that's exactly what Misato is. Out of all her personalities, she's definitely the strongest, or out of all the characters, she's definitely the strongest, and again just goes into why I think she's the hero. And of course you see her dad save her and falls down onto the thing, falls down onto the carcass, and or falls down onto the pod, and he dies in the explosion of second impact, where we see the wings and everything like that. And we already know that this was done to save humanity from the potential of the horribleness of what third impact would do, which is destroy all of humanity. It would either be second impact, and half the world's population die, or we all die. You know, it's a tough decision to make. Now, of course, and then we discover later, and because this really is a Misato episode, this really is, and when she's talking with Shinji about why, Shinji asks her why, and I'll get into Shinji's part of this a little later, because again, this is another reason, this is a great example of those parallel lines, or those full circles that I mentioned that Hideki Anno likes to do, but I'll get into Shinji's a little later, but Misato explains that her father, in many ways, was much like Gendo, where Misato's father was very dedicated to his work and never paid attention to his family. Never. In fact, she openly stated that she sided with her mom when her mom was the one that decided to get divorced from him. because Misato actually said something very human, and I was getting sick of seeing my mother crying every night, which I felt was a very heart-filled moment. And of course she grows to hate her dad because of that. Because of what she did to both her and her mom. And then all of a sudden her father, you see, I think it's at this point that she sees the world very black and white. She sees the world as you're either good or bad, that kind of way. And in some ways she still thinks that way just by the decision she makes, especially even in this episode where it's like, you've got to kill the angels, we either succeed or we fail. Which in very ways is true, and I actually agree with that philosophy to a certain extent. However, when her dad saves her, she says a line that really struck me. She goes, "I didn't know if I should hate him or love him." And it was like at that moment that a sudden spark of gray just came into her, into this black and white world of hers. And it was really this moment that I believe Misato was really born. I mean, even at the beginning, when she's clearly having a flashback, and the reason why she's having a flashback is really clever, too, because she just got promoted. She's been promoted from captain to major. And it's really interesting because she's sitting there, right? And she's getting dressed, and she's just reflecting on how she's gotten there, which is an extremely clever way to bring out this backstory, because that's what you do, usually, when something like a promotion happens. Oftentimes, you'll... whether in your own way or not, you will sit there and be like, what did I do to deserve this? I know I think that way. And that's exactly what Misato's doing. She just looks at herself in the mirror, and as she looks down on the cross and sees the cross. And she really believes that that event was the birth of her, and her dad is the reason why she's with Nerve and everything like that. Very touching Misato moment. Very touching. And really just makes you appreciate her more, because, I mean, she does kind of fall apart in later episodes, but then she just bounces right back in End of Evangelion. It's like that moment where you kind of lose yourself, and then you just come right back, because you're like, oh, yes, I've got to do this. This is my job. This is my place. Very heroic of her, which, again, just makes her, and this is the final thing I'll say, it really is why she is my favorite character. There is a lot to say about Misato in this, and that was just a great touch. Now, what's also interesting about this episode, I mean, right from the get-go, and this just goes to some of Shinji's progression as a character, because I don't believe this is what Shinji would have done in the first 4 episodes of the show, is that Toji and Kensuke need a place to stay to get out of the rain for a little bit, and Shinji welcomes them. He's like, oh yeah, sure, come on in. Like what a good friend does, and of course... what I like is that both Toji and Kensuke are very thankful to Shinji for that, and Shinji's like, whatever, you're friends. He actually kind of says, hey, you're my friends, whatever. Which I think is a very nice little touch. And then, of course, we have Asuka being a complete cunt and telling them not to look because she's changing, when really they wouldn't have changed anyways. They wouldn't have noticed anyways, because they were just asking where she was, and they weren't going to go looking for her, but now that they know where she's changed, whatever. It's her fault, but again, that's Asuka's little ploy. That's just because that's what her fucking problem is. And once again, I will have to say that I made a post on Facebook saying that Toji is the one sane man in the world gone crazy. And I agree with that here, because he's the first one who really says, oh my god, she's such a goddamn bitch, to Asuka, so I pat him on the back for that. However, it is also interesting to note, just to talk about Misato again, is that when Misato opens the door, she's not smiling. She's already all dressed, all made up, looks like her normal self, but she has just a straight face, this very deadpan face, and of course... everyone says hello to her and everything like that. She smiles. She's like, oh, hey. And then there's something off about her. And obviously, Shinji doesn't know what's going on. He's very curious about this, and I think so, or to an extent, I think Toji and Kensuke are as well, and Asuka just doesn't give a fuck. But it's interesting because if you see what they're doing, if you see what they're looking at, it's because she was just thinking about what happened, and when Kensuke sees that she's been promoted and stuff like that, it is interesting to know that she does smile. She gives a genuine smile when that happens, and she's actually very happy that they notice, and she's very happy that they're saying congratulations, and she does feel loved, and she doesn't really show it, but she actually does. She appreciates it, and that was just a good character moment. Also, I gotta say, an interesting bit of foreshadow with what Eva Unit 01 is when one of the characters goes, it looks like Shinji was born to pilot the Eva when he's almost at Asuka's level of synchronization with it, the robot. So that's an interesting bit of foreshadow, but I will definitely get into that when it's more prevalent. And of course, the only reason why Asuka gets really pissed off at Shinji is because they're praising him and not her. Because she is the one that really has the best percentage in terms of her synchronization with her Eva, and Shinji is catching up, and of course she doesn't like that. So what does she do? She has to put Shinji down any way she possibly can, because that could end up affecting the synchronization rate, and I will leave it at that. Now, on the car ride back to the place where Shinji's riding with Misato, you really get a sense that they really are Misato and Shinji are the same, are the different side to the same coin. Right, because Shinji, it really becomes prevalent that, and it's really true, that all Shinji does is worry about what other people think of him, when really that's not what people are attracted to. What people are attracted to are people who are usually outstanding. They care what other people think, but they're willing to go out there and be themselves, that kind of person, and that's not what Shinji is. Shinji very much so cares, he just wants to please people. While Misato, on the other hand, really doesn't give a fuck. She really doesn't. And what makes them on the same coin as their backstory is that Shinji could have become this, but he didn't. Shinji became the total and complete opposite of that. But yet, at the same time, it becomes clear that Misato also secretly does care about what other people think of her, just in a different way. She expresses it differently. She goes out and expresses it by being happy. She goes out there and by expressing her opinions. She wants to be known as that person that can think on her own. And that's what makes her interesting. While Shinji is just like, I just want to please people. So they basically want to achieve the same goal, but they're doing something else. But they're just going out completely different routes of doing it. There's a lot to say about the party scene where Asuka really is the one that throws a party really for her sake, but on the surface it looks like she's caring about Misato. Because she's invited to like Kaji and everyone over and shit like that. We have Kensuke, Toji, Shinji, and the weird class rep lady, I forgot her name because she's really boring in this. But anyways, what's interesting to note is how Shinji and Misato are sitting at the front of the table, and both of them are not interacting with each other in this party. They're not. Now that's an interesting note, because both of them are basically experiencing the same thing. Shinji is in deep thought about something, or he's just not used to this, and quite frankly, neither is Misato. Because, believe it or not, while Misato, on the surface, is kind of very outgoing, very extrinsic, she actually, and in many cases, as we discover in later episodes, she is more extrinsic, but she's very intrinsic. In many ways, like Shinji, because she doesn't like to express what she's really feeling. She doesn't like to express what really makes her tick, as some would say. And it's really prevalent here because... And then, while everyone's screaming and yelling at each other because of Asuka's stupidity, Shinji and Misato have a very decent conversation, which the dialogue they say is unbelievably deep, and has a lot more meaning to it than what's on the surface. You see, now, Misato was the first one to actually pick it up on it. She asks Shinji, she says to Shinji, you're still not used to this kind of interaction? And Shinji's like, no, I'm fine. And he actually does. He doesn't look happy, he doesn't look sad, he just looks content and kind of like in deep thought. Because, as I stated earlier, he's been a loner his entire life, so he really is not used to this kind of lifestyle. And it's very prevalent here, because he's very, very socially awkward. He's the kind of guy, when you go to like a dance or something like that, that they stand in the corner and watch. That's what Shinji is. And Shinji even openly states, I'm just not used to being with people. I'm just not used to being with friends like this. And then he says, why do they have to... And then he says, why do they have to be so noisy? Now that left me scratching my head, and still leaves me scratching my head, because... well, it's rather obvious that Shinji, being the intrinsic person that he is, likes the quiet. Well, many of us like the quiet. I love it when it's nice and quiet, when I can have some peaceful time to myself, and that's really what all Shinji wants. When Shinji is really happy, when Shinji is really content, it's not when he's with his friends. At this point, it's just when he's really by himself, where he's basically meditating, where he's basically just all alone, because really that's what he's kind of been used to. However, he acknowledges the fact that he needs his friends to survive, that without them he really would be nowhere right now, and I believe that he's thankful for that. He just doesn't know how to express it. And then of course Shinji actually sparks up or initiates a conversation with Masato and says, "Oh, by the way, congratulations on the promotion." He really didn't get to tell her that, and he's finally like, "Oh, I bet you've been praised for stuff like that," and I don't think he was meaning to bring up something personal with him, how he secretly is wanting praise from Gendo specifically, but he just said it, and Masato's like, "Yeah, I don't really want it though, because my promotion wasn't why I wanted to join Nerve. I joined Nerve to fight the Angels," which is an interesting bit of dialogue, because she kind of stated that before in previous episodes, but here we finally find out why, and that's because she basically wants to take revenge on them for killing her father, which means that she loved her dad ultimately, which is a nice little character moment, because I believe that Masato finally, after quite a bit of time passing, she finally realized that what her dad did was a true, valiant act of love. And Masato saw that and was like, "I'm going to take it out on the Angels. God damn it." And of course, as time has progressed, that has kind of changed, but the ultimate goal has remained the same. And then, of course, Masato gets really jealous when Kaji arrives with Ritsuko, which, you know, Ritsuko and Kaji are very happy to be there. They're happy. They are legitly happy for Masato and stuff like that, but they're still playing it as if they're kind of together just to make Masato jealous, which is hilarious. That is something that friends would do. There really is. Okay, now we finally go to the South Pole, to the site where Second Impact happens, and Ryutsuki and Gendo are together, talking about what happened. And Gendo actually, what's interesting is just how they've acted pretty much the same beforehand, but it really becomes obvious here that they really have a clash of opinions on several things, and it comes to a head here. Though they don't raise their voices at each other, I mean, that's just not either one of their styles, they're talking about what happened, and both of them are taking an opposite opinion. Gendo, surprisingly, is taking an optimistic point of view of Second Impact, saying that science is the benefit of humanity, is what makes humanity what it is. And then he's saying that Second Impact purified humanity, really, if you look at it. And really gave birth to a new Earth, gave birth to the new humankind. While Ryutsuki is saying, no, we survived. And then he says a line that makes me very interested, that is very interesting and brings up a very moral dilemma. He says he would rather live in a world where they survive, no matter how ruled with sin they are. Now that's a very interesting line, and brings up an interesting dilemma, I guess, an interesting way to look at things. Would you rather live in a world where you know, everything's evil, where everything's gone crazy, just so you could survive, or would you rather live in a world, or would you rather live in peace, or would you rather die? Would you want to live in that? That's an interesting bit, and it made me think a lot, and clearly made the audience think a lot, because that scene has been analyzed beyond belief, and really I don't think half of the reasons why that scene is there is to I think it was just there to establish that this is what happened because of Second Impact. They established at the beginning this is what it looked like, this is what happened. Before I get talking about how fucked up that angel design is, I need to bring up the Magi. The three Magi, of course, and I'll get into more of the religious symbolism behind it and how it works and how it fits together in the episode where we discover what the Magi really are. But there's a line in here that really says, what did the Magi recommend? And it's been established that these are computers. Why is she asking the computer for advice? That's odd. And I even noticed that in my first viewing. Of course, we'll get into why a little later. However, let's look at that angel design. What the fuck is that? It's literally from this point on that they take the kaiju thing about angels and throw them out the fucking window. Because from this point on, these are so abstract that you can no longer call these things kaiju. Now, it's interesting to note that when, I say that a lot, don't I? But when she explains this quote-unquote operation that a lot of people question, but to me makes a lot of sense for some reason, to the kids, and she says, if you guys succeed, I'll take you out for a steak dinner. And they complain about the steak dinner. Not to her face, of course, but they're like, really, that qualifies as a good dinner? You know, a part of me wants to smack those kids in the face, because quite frankly, I think what's going on with Masato a lot in this episode is that she's coming to terms with the fact that there's more behind this than her simply wanting revenge. And now that she's been promoted, there's more at stake than just herself. Because really here, we have these moments where we realize just how much responsibility she has to take, because of course Gendo and Ryutsuki are gone. She is now in charge of Nerve. She really is the number 3 person now, which that's a lot of responsibility to fall on someone's shoulders, and she's really feeling it here, and it's good. I think this is just a great thing, because from here on out she changes. In this episode, this being her first operation, big operation where she runs everything. So that's the only way I can really describe it, is that it's just interesting. Also, the line "a woman's intuition" comes back, because that was stated in an earlier episode of how things were going to play out. She says it again. That's a nice little touch. Now, I'll get into the battle a little bit later, but during the elevator scene, and this is just what I'll bring up right now, we learned just how selfish Asuka really is, because the reason why she's piloting the Evas is because of her wanting praise. She wants people to know her name. Which, of course, really, I guess, is anybody's dreams when they really look at it. And Ray's is just because she feels like she has nothing else to do. She feels like there's no other purpose for her to live, which is kind of true, unfortunately. But, well, Shinji's the only one that hasn't really figured out why he's piloted the Eva. And it's a nice moment when they finally defeat the Angel, when Gendo says, he never calls him Shinji, but he calls him Pilot. He calls him the Pilot, Unit 01 Pilot, and he just says, good job. And then it's also interesting to note that Shinji doesn't say, thanks, Dad. He goes, thank you, sir. He says, sir. He doesn't say dad. He says, sir. Which means that the relationship between the two, it's just so weird. It is very weird to look at and very weird to witness, the relationship between Shinji and his dad. There's a lot that I want to say, but I don't know how to say that, if that makes any sense. It was almost like this was kind of like a beginning to a door that would open, but Gendo just shuts it immediately, because I think, honestly, Gendo's a little scared to become close to Shinji again, because when we discover about what him and his wife Yui were like, it really makes a lot of sense why Gendo has a very closed-door policy. But it was nice to actually see that the reason why Shinji wants to pilot it is kind of a silly reason. He just wants his father's praise. He actually wants to feel complete, because actually, believe it or not, I think Shinji actually feels, you know what, my life is pretty good. I think Shinji feels like, hey, you know what, I'm good off. He's happy as friends and stuff like that. He's the happiest he's ever been. Now the only thing that he has left that he feels like he needs to hold and he needs to grab a hold of is his father's love. And it's really sad in that way, and it's very tragic in that way, but yet at the same time, very nice. I thought that was a very nice moment for him. Now, the battle itself is really epic. I mean, I think it's actually... In Evangelion 2.0, I think it's better done in that, because, well, quite frankly, they had more money, and the music had something to do with it, too. As much as I like the music in this episode, it's very 90s, if that makes any sense, while the music in the movie has a much more sense of urgency to it. And it's just overall a lot more powerfully done. And that's not knocking this episode. The scene is still really awesome. But it just felt a lot more intense in the movie. Now, at the end, when they go out and they actually eat and stuff like that, they actually go, and I think it was Shinji's idea, they actually go to somewhere really cheap because they know that Masato doesn't have that much money. And of course, Rei comes along. Now, what's interesting is that when Rei comes along, why does she come along? She's so extrinsic. I mean, so intrinsic. She's even more intrinsic than Shinji is at this point. But she comes along anyways, and I think it's because she's actually starting to grow an attachment to these characters. I think she's starting to grow an attachment specifically to Shinji, and she doesn't know why. And again, it's not love. It's not that, because... And of course, it's foreshadowed, very minuscule, but it's foreshadowed to what she really is. And then, of course, it's also very nice to see Misato return to her old self here. She realizes, yeah, everything's going to be fine. It's like she had a little slump, and now she's back to normal. And it's a very nice touch, and I think very well done. Just like this episode, believe it or not, I think this episode is extremely well done. It's actually one of my favorites, easily on my top 5 favorite episodes. So with that being said, stay tuned for the next episode of Congratulations, and this is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce saying sayonara. So, yeah, remember what I said about this show getting really depressing really quick? Yeah. Hello, insects of YouTube, it is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce, and welcome to the next episode of Congratulations, an Neon Genesis Evangelion Retrospective. Here, we're going to be talking about the next episode, which is called The Angel Invasion, which I much prefer that to the stupid-ass American title. So, let us just dive right onto this motherfucker, and I just want to say this is very much so a Ritsuko, dedicated episode. Finally, Ritsuko gets her own episode, and it's kind of funny because I mentioned in the last video how, like, I know what the Magi are, but we're not going to talk about it. I totally forgot that the Magi is explained quite a bit in this episode, so kind of ironic there. Now, it's interesting to note that during the first scene, we have Maya and Ritsuko, and they're working on some horse shit, some technical shit that looks totally awesome, though we don't really care what it is. And Maya's typing really fast, and this is also the first time that Maya actually calls Ritsuko senpai, which, if you know what that is, that's basically the highest compliment you could give anyone in Japan. It really is. And that's really interesting, you know, considering how the relationship between Ritsuko and Maya kind of progresses from here on out. Or at least it's really interesting. I stated in I'm not sure if it was the last episode or the episode before, how Maya is very close to Ritsuko, and it really does come through on this one. Which I feel really bad, because the subtitles on the DVDs, this is a complaint about the DVDs, don't do it justice, because they always say ma'am. That's not really what senpai means, or senpei, or however you want to pronounce it. You know, it's hard to do it in English. But that was just an interesting note, and of course Ritsuko is more than willing to help out Maya. Maya's definitely more than willing to help out Ritsuko. It's a nice little touch. Now, this is the first time that we really have Ritsuko referring to the Magi as her mother. She's saying mother. She always says mother. And it's inferenced and becomes a reality a little bit later in the episode that she says that really that's what the Magi is. We learned the Magi is her mother, and that's the big, huge fucking reveal in this episode. Which that's really fucked up. Of course, now... Oh, fuck it, I might as well just... Time for religious symbolism. The three magi, of course, were the three kings, supposedly three kings, even though there's technically more than three, but famously there's three kings that basically come down and give Jesus the gift. The gifts when he was born. They follow the North Star and so on and so forth. And there were three of them. And they are Balthasar, Caspar, and Melchior. Now, I'm not quite sure what that has to do with this, and I'm pretty sure that the only reason why they chose the three magi names was because it fit kind of what they were going for with them. Not that the personalities have anything to do with it, but of course we learned in this episode that the magi are each a representation of Ritsuko's mother. And I believe Caspar is the one that's explored with the most in here, because Caspar is the one that ultimately saves the day. And I believe Caspar is the woman, the representation of the woman. Now, you can say that the Magi was just a random reference thing. No, it actually kind of makes sense, because there's three of them, and things just kind of add up. On a physical sense, they add up. Though you can really argue, and this is the one area where I can argue where the religious symbolism wasn't really necessary, but to me it still wound up working just because of the themes that go along with the Magi. Anyhow, this episode explains how the Magi aren't really a computer. As we see later in this episode, Ritsuko is poking at her mom's dead brain, which is really fucked up and disturbing. So then that means these really aren't computers, and they're not even AIs. They're not even artificial intelligence. They're more than that. They are actually technically like a being, therefore, because they're using human brains. They're using the human mind. Which then always... That goes into why, in the previous episode, Misato was like, what was the advice that the Magi are giving us? Now that makes sense because of what is revealed in this episode, which is a nice touch, and it answers a few questions. Though at the same time raising a few questions, like what the fuck happened to Ritsuko's mother? That, of course, is explained later, in rather gruesome detail. And why, of course, is Ritsuko acting the way she is whenever it comes to the Magi, which, of course, actually is kind of explained later on in this episode, but we'll get into that a little later. Now, here's something that I think this is one reason why I like this episode so much. There's a couple of reasons. The one reason is because the angel itself is really cool, because it's not an actual kaiju, or it's not this gigantic being. It's actually billions of microscopic organisms that are basically serving as a computer. That's cool. And the other reason why I like this episode so much is it reminds me ridiculously of the Andromeda Strain, directed by Robert Wise, in terms of, 1, how this episode is shot, 2, how it's lit, 3, how it's edited even, and 4, how characters just kind of react. And that goes with how, like, when everything starts getting really intense, especially towards the middle of this episode, where, like, the cameras are very stagnant, they're quick shots moving around, you really feel the intensity of what's going on, and you really are on the edge of your seat, just like what happens on the Andromeda Strain. And another thing that reminds me of the Andromeda Strain, just because I happen to watch it right now, is, of course, the 3 kids getting basically cleaned up. They're getting so clean because they don't want any contamination with the Avas. That kind of reminded me of it, because there's a huge section of the film of the Andromeda Strain, and the book too, where the main characters have to go through, basically, they have to get cleansed. But what I mean by cleansed is they get fucking cleansed, like no germs at all. But this isn't about the Andromeda Strain, but that just reminded me of it, and I just wanted to give it a little shout out. Now, this is an interesting bit of dialogue that happens on here, especially if you've already seen this show like I have, and you're going back. Some major foreshadowing, a couple of lines here. There is a dilemma with the 3 Magi, which a dilemma is when something clashes with each other, basically, to say it as dumb as possible if you don't know what it really is. And of course, this being somewhat of a computer, it doesn't like that. And Ritsuko says, it seems that the personalities are clashing with one another. Alright. And then, of course, Misato, and first off, that was interesting, though they kind of, and they explain it a little later, but Misato answers this, aren't they just one? And Ritsuko says, you really don't have any idea what's going on here, do you? Oh, my computer's about to die. You really don't have any idea what's going on here, do you? Now, considering the fact that she is third in command, Misato, the fact that she's third in command of NERV is kind of disturbing, because it's very true, we learn, that Misato really doesn't have a clue what's going on in NERV. Well, she does, but she doesn't... She's only scratching the surface with her knowledge. Ritsuko, on the other hand, we discover knows significantly more. She still doesn't know everything. But she knows a ridiculous amount more of the disturbing nature that is NERV. And we'll definitely get in that more into future episodes. Something that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this episode is that the kids are not in this episode, like, at all. This episode is so focused on the adults, it's hilarious, because on the previous episode, or on a couple episodes previous, it proved that the kids were competent on their own. On this one, it's very much the adults taking charge, which again just goes into kind of like that full circle kind of thing that I talked about that's very much so a pattern in the show, is that everything kind of comes full circle. Or the themes kind of come circling around and stuff like that, which is an interesting note, because once the kids are ejected from the pod, once they discover that, you know, this bacteria that's been dissolving everything is really an angel, which is awesome, they're gone for the rest of the episode until the end, and that's really interesting. God damn, do I like this episode. It's so interesting because you see the proteins, like, dissolving everything, right? And some great animation. You basically get this sense of the urgency of what's going on, and just to look on, like, Misato and Ritsuko's faces alone really scream the essence of or the fear that's going through NERV at this point, because literally no matter what they do, no matter what they shut themselves down for, whatever they do, they're fucked, because this protein stuff is just gonna, or whatever these microfibers are just gonna eat through literally everything. In fact, they do. There's that great scene where they break through the window, and that kind of stuff, and I just loved it. I just fell in love with it. And just when I thought Gendo couldn't get more badass, he does, and with the alarms going off, he gets on the phone, and he blatantly lies to the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, saying that it was a technical malfunction, and that there is nothing to be worried about. Now, you could say... Some people could say, well, he's doing that just to protect, you know, the people, to stop a panic, when no. I think Gendo's really doing it for a selfish reason. And that's because, well, that's what Gendo's character is. Gendo's character is unbelievably selfish, which is the theme of Evangelion, even in the rebuilds. Anyways, and Gendo's like, nope, fuck it. He's really just covering NERV's hide, which is hilarious. There's also some major foreshadow in that scene when Gendo says, Ava Unit 01 is our top priority, make sure that we save it above the other two Avas. Now, what could that be foreshadowing? I'm not going to get into, because we discovered that again in a later episode, but that was a nice bit of foreshadowing. Speaking of which, Kaji is in this episode, believe it or not, and what the fuck is he doing? Now, of course, I know what he's doing because of later episodes, and I'm not going to get into this now, but it was nice to see that there's a lot of stuff being brought up in this episode that never gets answered until a later episode. There's a shit ton of stuff in here that foreshadows what's coming. I mean, that's something that Evangelion does extremely well, is they foreshadow everything, and that's genius. But of course, it's also an interesting shot, because you see the angel, like, dissolving all the metal above him, and everything is shutting down. Some great cinematography and some great lighting. And Kaji says the interesting line, well, now... no time to work now, and then he jumps off all badass like it was nothing and runs away. So that just says right there that he's not just in it for NERV. There's something else going on with him, and what's you know, progressing with himself. You know, we don't know who he's working for, but there's definitely some kind of third and fourth party going on here. It's also cool when the angel begins to hack into the Magi. We really get an understanding for what the Magi does, or how it works. And of course, because we find out that it's basically three parts of the same person, being Ritsuko's mother, it makes sense why, if the angel can hack into one, why that one piece of the Magi, for example, let's say it hacks into Balthazar, I can't remember which one it first hacks into, but then it goes into Melchior. The angel would make Balthazar hack into Melchior. You know, I think that makes a lot of sense from a technical standpoint, and it really works well here. Also, there's a lot of tension going on, because though the viewer themselves don't really understand what's happening in terms of how important the Magi are yet at this point, we see how the characters are reacting, and seeing the characters react the way that they are makes the viewer kind of feel the same way. Though we might not understand what's going on, clearly the characters do, except for Misato. And that's what makes it work. And of course, as the angel is hacking into the Magi, it's interesting to note. I say that a lot, I know, but pay attention to the animation on Ritsuko. I mean, at the point where that scene comes up, it's before we discovered that it is actually her mother. And you can tell that she has a personal involvement with the Magi. She's clearly the expert. Excuse me. She is the expert on the Magi, and this is evident. This is evidence here. I mean, just look at her. She looks panicked. She looks frightened, and that's what's interesting. That's what drives me on with this show. Is stuff like this. If there's anything this show knows how to do, and that is show expressions with faces that are not over the top like in some animes, and I give Hideki Anno props for that. Misato also proposes a perfectly logical explanation of how they could possibly get rid of this angel, or how to get it to a point where the Evas could do their job and take care of it, and that is destroy the Magi. Now, of course, Ritsuko doesn't like that. Now, at first, Ritsuko keeps her cool and is like, "No, you have to request our permission to do that." And then Misato makes a formal request. To do that, and Ritsuko, in all essence, pulls a Will Smith from After Earth and goes, "Denied!" God, that movie's terrible. And that was interesting, just to show some more of a personal connection with the Magi. And that is, Ritsuko is not willing to let her mother die. I mean, we discovered later on just how difficult, and even in this episode, how difficult it was, because of course Ritsuko says the very interesting line, it's probably my favorite one on this one, where she said she was my mother. Like, she has the opinion of her mom, saying she was her mom, she loved her mom, but she never paid enough time to her. So I guess all these characters, have parental issues, but we'll talk about that a little later. So they go into the back door of the Magi, and you see a bunch of these notes all over the place, and Ritsuko's system line describes to the developer, meaning that these are basically almost like diary entries for Ritsuko's mom. And even though Maya and Misato are basically gawking over this information that's going on, pay attention to what Ritsuko looks at. Ritsuko, who has had a former relationship with Gendo, sees this describing on a bunch of these notes and pays attention to it, not paying attention to anything what Maya's saying. And the note says, "Ikari, you jerk." And that was apparently written by her mother. And of course, we find out later what that means, and it's unbelievably disturbing and messed up, and will probably rape you in every way imaginable, but we'll get into that when the episode arrives. Now, there are also a couple of lines in this episode that are interesting and really describe some of Ritsuko's characteristics, and that she hides a lot of things. One, I've already talked about in previous episode, that she's dyed her hair, and she wears a lot of lipstick, hence the cigarettes with the lipstick stains all over it. And that is a little bit of foreshadow of that she's hiding something, and that she's trying to hide herself in a few ways. However, this episode we actually get literal confirmation of this. One is when Misato says the line, "Why do you always take everything on your shoulders? You can rely on other people." Meaning that Ritsuko never likes to rely on other people. She's kind of stubborn like me, in the sense that if you want to get things done right, you have to do it yourself. That kind of mentality. And the other one is when Misato asks her, "Can you tell me about the Magi?" Ritsuko blatantly lies and says, it's a long and uninteresting story. Because she doesn't want to talk about it. You know, this is why she always deals with the Magi by herself. The fact that she's letting Misato and Maya in there is a foot on its own. Is a major feat on its own, but she's hiding the fact that she really knows the messed up backstory of what the Magi are. Now that is a really interesting note, and I think it's a very subtle form of foreshadow to just what's going to come, especially in episode 23. And the line where Ritsuko talks about her mother, and Misato says, oh, so that's why when we discover that it's literally her mom's brain that's running the Magi, which is disturbing as all fuck, and Ritsuko's poking it with a needle. Anyways, Misato asks, so that's why you don't want to destroy it. And Ritsuko actually gives a very honest, but yet slightly kind of ambiguous answer. She goes, I don't think so. I never really liked my mom very much. That was interesting. One of the final things I want to talk about this episode is, this is an example of something I like to call Star Trek action. Now, as we know, a lot of Star Trek episodes, especially like TNG, it wasn't an action-packed episode. It wasn't an action-packed series. A lot of the action usually revolved around intenseness and edits, mixed in with music, especially in seasons 1, 2, 3, and even 4 to an extent. This is an example of that. This Evangelion does it a lot, where there's no action going on per se, but what the action is people are doing stuff. It's not like, oh my god, we're blowing shit up, like angels fighting Ava's kind of action. It's more of, okay, we're typing on a... Because this is a perfect example where Ritsuko... All the final action scene is Ritsuko typing on a computer. That sounds really boring, right? But it's edited in such a way that makes it really action-packed. It makes you feel very intense, and that's what Star Trek does. So I call it Star Trek action. And this episode has it a lot. And the last thing I want to talk about in this episode is the revelation of exactly what the Magi is. The Magi is basically split into 3 parts. I know that Casper is one representation, but here's what they are. They are Ritsuko's mom as a scientist, herself as a woman, and herself as a mother. Which is very interesting, because all 3 are different aspects of basically the human mind. Science being very logical, the woman being very selfish, and the mother being very selfless. And those are 3 of the emotions that I think the human experience uses the most, and I think it makes sense why they would be part of the Magi. Very, very well done and very well integrated, I think, and that's just another thing that I love about Evangelion, is that their science is awesome. And, of course, what keeps the Magi going is that all 3 of these are always fighting for dominance, and none of them can possibly win. That's what's cool. That goes into why when the angel hacked into one, it wanted to hack into the other. They were fighting for dominance, and that's literally what the human mind is, isn't it? It's literally parts of your brain fighting over what's more important, what's more dominant, and that's what goes on with these computers. And again, that just goes into why when Hideki Anno was making this, he was very interested in psychology. This is an example of that. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and congratulations on Neon Genesis Evangelion Retrospective. Stay tuned for the next episode, which should be interesting considering the fact that it's half a retrospective of a retrospective and half a original fucked up thing. So please stay tuned for that, and this is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce saying sayonara. sex of YouTube, it is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce, and welcome to the next episode of Congratulations, a Neon Genesis Evangelion Retrospective. Today we're talking about the next episode, which is called The Weaving of a Story. Which, this is interesting, because literally half of this episode is literally nothing but a retrospective. Yeah, this is definitely going to be a short video. Literally the first half of this video, of this is nothing but a retrospective of all the angels that have attacked previous. However, towards the last 30 seconds of the first half of this episode, we finally get to see Seeley again. They make their return, and of course Gendo seems to be interrogated and stuff like that. And we get confirmation that we knew that Nerve worked with Seeley, but we finally understand that Seeley is the head. That Nerve works under Seeley. Seeley has the ultimate control, and they also bring out this whole thing of the whole Dead Sea Scrolls, the whole idea that that is the process in which the Human Instrumentality Project, whatever that is, of course I know what that is, but I'm going to get into that when we talk about End of Evangelion, and everything like that. And apparently Gendo's been trying to write his own script as well, his own thing, where he wants to do his own thing, and of course Seeley doesn't like that, but that's basically the last 30 seconds. So, again, we get just Gendo being his badass self, which is awesome. And then after that, after the commercial break, or whatever the hell it is, we get a minute and a half of mind rape. Of course, this becomes rather common for Evangelion from this point on, but this is the first glimpse we really get of it. And it's literally from nothing but the point of view of Ray's mind, and she's asking a lot of questions. She's basically, I think this really is her state of mind, because we discovered that she's basically she's trying to synchronize with Eva Unit 01, not Unit 0, and I think she's basically sitting there, considering the fact that when we find out what Ray is and what is inside Eva Unit 01, it makes a lot more sense why this happens, but she's really just contemplating on stuff. She's sitting there like, this is her state of mind, and everything's very logical. Water, it's comforting. Water, this, it's this. Black and white, everything's very black and white. But then all of a sudden she starts thinking about Shinji, and she starts thinking about Misato, Asuka, and of course Gendo. And in the process of that, suddenly everything becomes very strange. She's no longer talking about this means this is this is that. She's no longer talking like that. She starts asking herself questions like, what is this? What am I doing here? What does this mean? What am I? Who am I? These kind of really philosophical questions that, of course, no one can ever really answer. And to me, this is showing some progression with Ray's character. Of course, beforehand, we've always seen Ray as being that really black and white, very emotionalist, stereotypical animated character. And of course, that's exactly what Hideaki Anno intended for her, was to actually be somewhat of a spoof of that. And here we're actually seeing her get emotions, and of course, that's why she's asking, why am I here? Who am I doing? Who am I doing, God? What am I doing here? And who am I? Stuff like that. And that's those are very emotional questions. Those are very important questions that usually require emotions to answer. And so it's nice to see that Ray has kind of progressed to that level. And of course, she doesn't get any answers, but we see her asking those. It's again one of those steps towards her becoming human. And in fact, she does very much so become human by the time of episode 22, or 21. And you know, I like that. You know, it's very mind-rapey, and I can question why they did it, because at this time they actually had money to spend, but it at least made me think, so I'll at least give them props for that. And, okay, the music that plays during this mind-rape scene is so unnerving. It almost sounds like it's a Gregorian chant, but it's even creepier than that. I have the entire soundtrack on my computer, and I listen to it all the time. Whenever these two songs, I forgot what this one is called. However, it has like this kind of like bongo drum beat to it. And then there's this one that appears in, especially in the later part of the series, that it's just the Gregorian chant choir kind of sounding thing. I always skip those tracks because those tracks literally unnerve me. they send shivers down my spine that are not pleasant. You know, sometimes you get shivers down your spine that's like really pleasant. For example, Godzilla roaring in the theater for the first time, that gave me good shivers down my spine. Caesar screaming no and Rise of the Planet of the Apes, that sent shivers down my spine. This sends a very creepy shiver down my spine that I don't enjoy. And even watching this, it does that. And I guess I'll give it props for being able to unnerve me, because not much does like this. But man, it isn't an experience I like to repeat over and over again. But this is one of the reasons why I usually skip this episode, and especially episode 20, 25, and 26. But we'll get into that as they come. Now, at first, I have to admit, I was like, why the fuck are they interchanging the plugs? Why is she in 01? Why is Shinji in Unit 0? But then it started making sense to me. What if one got damaged? What if it was an emergency and that was the only one they could get into? It started making sense, so props to that as well. Now, it's also fun to see how Misato is covering for Asuka. Asuka is basically wondering why Rei and Shinji are switching out, but she is not, which is a legit concern, but of course she's being a complete cunt about it. And, you know, Misato says, well, you don't want to pilot any of the other ones, so we're not going to put you through it. But in reality, Misato actually says to herself there's no way anybody else could harmonize with Eva Unit 02, which is a minor foreshadow to Kaoru, if you look at it in episode 24, because Kaoru can sync with Unit 02, which is interesting, and a bit mind-numbing, to be honest. I have to admit that I'm dead. I don't know if it was because of what I've previously done today or what, but man, this episode really just drained me for some reason. Ugh. And also, of course, when they're starting to synchronize Shinji and Unit 0, everything goes out first, until you realize that there's some sort of connection between Shinji and Rei that hasn't yet been explained. When it's finally explained, it makes a lot of sense. However, here, it even foreshadows it a little bit. Because immediately after, you know, he starts thinking about Rei and stuff like that, like it's drilling into his mind, Asuka asks him, how does it feel to be in your mommy's breast? Or how does it feel to be in your mom's womb? Which, Hideki Anno's not dumb. When he does something like that, he does it for a reason. And so that's a lot of foreshadow to what's about to come. And then, of course, Eva Unit 0 goes berserk again. That one tends to go berserk a lot more than even Eva Unit 1. However, it's like it's rejected. It doesn't want Shinji to pilot it. It doesn't want anybody other than Rei at this point. It didn't even want Rei at first, because remember there was that episode where I want to say it was episode 3, where Rei gets horribly injured during the beginning and Gendo burns his hands, and it's doing the same exact thing to Shinji right here, which to be honest, to this day, I don't really understand why. I mean, it would make sense why Unit 01 would do that to Rei, but why is Unit 0 doing that to Shinji? It doesn't add up to me. That's a complaint I have. This just doesn't add up. And then the final thing I'll talk about here, before we get into the religious symbolism, is Gendo and Ryutsuki, they're playing this weird game, right? And they talk about the Human Instrumentality Project and how they're basically going to ditch Seele. Meaning that Seele is just above them, but they're basically going to do their own thing. They're going to pull a Michael Cimino from Heaven's Gates, and they're going to say, fuck the studio, and we're doing our own thing anyways. Because that's exactly what Gendo and Ryutsuki are doing, and they're both in on it. Though they both might have different ideas of what the outcome's going to be. Because clearly they are both in favor of this, or at least Gendo is, this Human Instrumentality Project, whatever it is, though we don't know what it is quite yet. Yes, I know what it is, whatever. But they have their own means of writing it together, because once again, Ryutsuki brings up an alternate script, meaning that they've got their own agenda, meaning that they're writing their own thing, which is clever, that's really well written. And of course we have the integration of Adam, which is interesting, and we'll finally realize what it is in episode 24. However, it is time for religious symbolism. The Lance of Longinus. Now this has an interesting bit of history. The Lance of Longinus is apparently the spear that the Roman soldiers used to stab Jesus to make sure he was dead. while he was on the cross. They punctured Jesus' skin with it, and apparently no one knows if this Lanza Longinus actually exists or not. Now, what is important about this is that we clearly see we don't know exactly what it's being used for, other than the fact that it's apparently going to contain, at this time, we know it as Adam. Okay, that makes sense. And so, therefore, they're using it as basically a spear just like that. The themes are there because of it, and to be honest, it works. Anyways, really the shortest episode by far. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll get into more later. So, let the fun begin. I'm Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce, saying sayonara.